At her grandson's birthday, Evelyn heard her daughter snap. "Don't let her near the cake, she ruins photos." She smiled. She stepped back. She said nothing. By morning, her signature had frozen every account her daughter thought she controlled, including her son's college fund. For decades, she'd been the quiet giver in the background. Now she was the one writing the rules, and when her daughter came for what she thought was hers, the answer would be in black ink and court seals. We're just getting started, but before we dive in, tell me, where are you listening from? These stories aren't just mine, they're mirrors. Drop your city in the comments, and if you believe in second chances, hit subscribe. She looked at me, then the cake, and said, "Don't let her near it. She ruins photos." Evelyn stood at the kitchen doorway, one hand on the counter's edge. The cake dominated the island, 3 tiers of blue frosting, fondant stars, Jason's name piped in perfect white. Jennifer's voice carried easily over the hum of conversation. "Don't let her near it," she told the photographer, her tone brisk, almost playful, but not enough to hide the edge. "She ruins photos." A few guests glanced over, then quickly away. Paul, leaning against the fridge with a paper plate, didn't say a word. Evelyn kept her face arranged in a polite smile. "I'll just stay here," she murmured, barely audible. Jason tore through the room in his dinosaur t-shirt, chasing a friend down the hallway, laughter bouncing off the walls. He didn't notice the quiet cut in his mother's voice. Evelyn's hands tightened around her glass. She'd baked every birthday cake until last year, spending hours whisking, smoothing, decorating, just to see Jason's eyes light up. Now she was a bystander, positioned out of the frame. She answered questions from a woman at the punch bowl, about the weather, nodding at the right moments. It was a role she knew well, present, but peripheral. Still the words replayed, "Don't let her near it." Her gaze flicked to Jennifer, who stood at the center of everything, straight-backed, efficient, her hair catching the light. Once, that confidence had felt like pride Evelyn had helped shape. Now it felt like a wall. Paul moved past her toward the patio, brushing her arm lightly but still not speaking. She wondered if he'd heard, or if choosing silence was easier than stepping in. The photographer positioned the family near the cake. Jennifer bent to smooth Jason's hair, the picture of maternal care. Evelyn stayed at the doorway, a silent fixture. "Big smiles," the photographer called. Jason blew out his candles in one determined breath. Laughter and applause filled the kitchen. Instinct pushed Evelyn forward to help slice the cake, as she had every year before, but Jennifer intercepted her, slipping the knife from her hand with a practiced smile. "I've got it, Mom. Why don't you mingle?" Evelyn stepped back, the warmth of the room replaced by a chill that had nothing to do with the winter air outside. Conversations continued, but her focus narrowed to the sound of plates being handed out, forks scraping frosting, Jason's laughter as someone teased him about making a wish. She drifted toward the edge of the room, where the noise softened. That's when she noticed the silver frame on a side table near the stairs. The photo inside was from Jason's 6th birthday. She was in the background, mid-laugh, hands poised over the cake she'd made. Her smile was there, but it was small, tentative, as if she'd been caught unsure whether she belonged in the moment. Her thumb traced the edge of the frame. From the kitchen, Jennifer's voice rang out again, warm and commanding. Evelyn didn't move toward it. She stayed with the photograph, her eyes fixed on the woman she had been smiling, but cautious, always cautious. It struck her then, this wasn't new. The comments, the subtle repositioning, the public corrections. She'd been enduring them for years, telling herself it was just how things were. She set the frame down again, but this time straighter. The noise of the party swelled and fell, but Evelyn didn't turn back toward it. She stood there, steady, her hands loose at her sides. In that still corner of the house, Evelyn thought, maybe it's time I stop standing in the background. Everyone is laughing and talking, but I'm no longer part of the conversation. The dining room smelled of roast chicken and rosemary, the table set with Jennifer's cream-colored plates and matching linen napkins. Candles flickered along the center, their light catching on the polished silverware. It looked warm, inviting, like the kind of table where people belonged. Evelyn sat at the far end, close enough to hear every word, but too far to be part of any of it. Jennifer and Paul occupied the center, voices animated, weaving in and out of each other's sentences. Jason sat between them, cheeks pink from the sugar rush, giggling at a joke Paul had made about dinosaurs wearing ties. No one mentioned the cake, no one mentioned her. The clatter of cutlery filled the pauses, along with bursts of laughter that seemed to skip past her like stones over water. Evelyn smiled when others did, but her fork moved slowly over her plate. The chicken was perfectly cooked, but it might as well have been cardboard. Jennifer leaned toward Paul, recounting some story from her office. He chuckled, shaking his head, asking questions that kept her talking. They looked comfortable together, like a pair performing a well-practiced act. Evelyn noticed how easily Paul's gaze slid past her when he reached for the wine bottle, refilling everyone's glass but hers. She could have asked, but she didn't. Instead, she let her eyes travel around the table, taking in faces that barely turned her way. This wasn't new. It was just sharper tonight, the edges visible after the remark in the kitchen. She thought about all the years she'd spent making this family's life run smoothly. The weekends she'd given up to babysit, the meals cooked and delivered when Jennifer had late nights at work, the checks quietly written to cover mortgage gaps, tuition, car repairs, always without asking for credit. Her sacrifices were woven into the fabric of their lives, yet invisible like the threads that hold a hem in place. You only notice them when they come undone. Jennifer laughed again, the sound bright, effortless. Evelyn tried to remember the last time her daughter had looked at her that way, open, warm. She couldn't. Somewhere along the way, pride had hardened into something else, something cold. Jason was telling a story now, his hands moving as much as his mouth. Evelyn caught fragments about a science project and a cardboard volcano. She wanted to ask him more, to be part of it, but before she could speak, Jennifer cut in with another question, drawing his attention back like a magnet. Evelyn's smile faded. She pressed her napkin into her lap, smoothing the creases. The feeling was familiar, a kind of quiet erasure that had been happening for years, long before tonight. The cake incident was just the latest in a series of small humiliations, each one wrapped in the softness of, "It's not a big deal," but it was. She stared at the candle nearest her, watching wax pool around its base. Once she would have told herself not to make trouble, to be grateful for the invitation, to focus on Jason's happiness, but she wasn't the same woman she'd been 10 years ago, or even last year. Tonight had stripped away the last of that patience. Her gaze shifted to Jennifer, mid-story again, her hands painting pictures in the air. Paul nodded along, oblivious or pretending to be. Evelyn wondered which hurt more. The conversation swelled again, another wave of laughter rolling past her without slowing. Evelyn didn't try to catch it. She let it go. Under the table, her hand slipped into her bag, fingers brushing against her phone. She thought about all the times she'd decided to wait, to keep the peace, to hope that things would get better if she stayed quiet. Each one felt heavier now, pressing against her ribs. She opened her messages. The hum of the room carried on around her, oblivious. Jason asked for another piece of bread. Paul poured more wine. Jennifer checked her watch and glanced toward the kitchen. Evelyn typed slowly, deliberately, the words forming without hesitation. "It's time, I want to make some changes." She sent it to one person, her lawyer. Then she slid the phone back into her bag, lifted her glass of water and took a slow sip. Across the table, Jennifer's laughter rang out again. Evelyn met her daughter's eyes for the first time all evening and didn't look away. This wasn't just about the cake. This was about taking control of my life again. The morning after Jason's birthday, Evelyn sat at her kitchen table, a half-finished cup of tea cooling beside her. The quiet of her small house was a stark contrast to the noise of last night, the clink of glasses, the bursts of laughter that had rolled past her like she was furniture. She replayed it all, Jennifer's voice in the kitchen, Paul's silence at the table, her own stillness as the evening moved around her. The text to Grace had been simple, but her thumb had trembled as she sent it. Now Grace's reply sat open on her phone. "Come in tomorrow morning, we'll talk." By the time Evelyn walked into Grace's office the next day, she had already rehearsed what she wanted to say, though her chest still felt tight. Grace's office was all clean lines and soft light, the air faintly scented with lemon polish. "Evelyn," Grace said warmly, rising from behind her desk to shake her hand. Sit. Let's start from the beginning. Evelyn lowered herself into the chair opposite, fingers laced together in her lap. I've been thinking about the trust, about my account. I need to know exactly what's mine. Grace slid a folder across the desk. You still control the core trust account, about 40% of the total value. There's also your personal savings, which is untouched, and your investments are still in your name. Evelyn nodded slowly, absorbing the numbers as Grace talked her through them. She had never thought of herself as wealthy, but seeing the figures written plainly was grounding. They represented decades of work, careful saving, and 1,000 quiet sacrifices. And if I wanted to make changes to who benefits from the trust, Evelyn asked. You can, Grace said. It's your right, as trustee, but removing family members will have consequences. Especially if they've come to expect your financial support. Evelyn's lips pressed into a thin line. Jennifer and Paul have been using that expectation to control me for years. They decide when I'm included, when I'm useful. The rest of the time I'm background. Grace leaned back slightly. I understand, but you need to be sure this isn't a decision made in the heat of hurt feelings. Evelyn's gaze hardened. This isn't about last night. That was just the last straw. I've been giving and giving for years, and the more I give, the less I seem to matter. She thought of the mortgage she'd helped cover when Paul's hours were cut. The college fund she'd built for Jason without being asked. The quiet transfers to Jennifer's account whenever she hinted at unexpected bills. None of it had bought her kindness. If anything, it had bought permission for them to treat her as someone they could manage. Grace opened a fresh set of documents. We can amend the trust to limit distributions, or remove them entirely as beneficiaries. I'll need your signature on each change. The pen felt heavier than it should when Evelyn picked it up. She read each line carefully. The legal phrasing stark but certain. Her name was already there, printed in steady black ink. All that was missing was her own hand deciding. With each signature she felt the coil of something loosening inside her. It wasn't relief yet, more like the first deep breath after holding it for too long. When she finished, Grace gathered the pages neatly. That's the first step. From here, we'll file the amendments with the court. The changes will be official within 30 days. Evelyn leaned back, exhaling slowly. And they can't undo it? Not without your consent. You've just reclaimed full control. The words settled in her chest, heavy and exhilarating all at once. She imagined Jennifer's face when she realized she could no longer dictate the terms of their relationship through expectation and obligation. She imagined Paul's discomfort when his quiet avoidance no longer protected his share. For a flicker of a moment she felt almost giddy. Then the nervousness followed, because endings, even necessary ones, carried weight. Grace studied her for a moment, then folded her hands on the desk. Evelyn, I've known you a long time. You don't make rash moves, but I have to ask. She paused, her tone sharpening just slightly. This will change things forever. Are you sure you're ready? Evelyn met her lawyer's eyes, her fingers still resting on the pen, and said nothing, because in that moment she realized the answer would define the rest of her life. I wasn't ready for what she'd say, but I knew I had to stand my ground. Evelyn had just finished washing the breakfast dishes when her phone lit up on the counter. Jennifer. She stared at the name for a moment, feeling that familiar tug, half duty, half dread. She pressed Mom? Jennifer's voice was bright but tight, the kind of tone that sounded like it was balancing on the edge of irritation. Why weren't you at dinner last night? Paul said you just didn't show. Evelyn dried her hands slowly, buying herself a breath. I had other things to take care of. A pause on the other end, then a quick, incredulous laugh. Other things? You could have called. Jason asked about you. I'll see Jason soon, Evelyn said evenly. But Jennifer, there's something you should know. I've made some changes to the trust, and to my finances. Silence, then another laugh. This one louder, less amused. You're joking. I'm not. Come on, Jennifer said, the smile still in her voice. What change? Evelyn stepped toward the kitchen window, watching a thin stream of sunlight catch the dust in the air. You and Paul will no longer have automatic access to my accounts. I've restructured the trust. Distributions will only happen if I approve them in writing. The laugh vanished. You did what? I took back control, Evelyn said simply. Jennifer's voice sharpened. You can't just do that. This is our family's future you're talking about. No, Evelyn said, it's my future, and my present, and it's time I stopped letting other people dictate how I live it. The air between them tightened. You're trying to ruin us, Jennifer snapped. Do you have any idea what this will do to Paul, to Jason? This isn't about hurting anyone, Evelyn said, her voice low but steady. It's about making sure I'm not being treated like a bank account instead of a person. There was a sharp inhale on the other end. If you go through with this, you won't hear from me again. Is that what you want? To just cut your own daughter out of your life? Evelyn's heart thudded once, hard. The old reflex was to soften, to backpedal before the threat became real. But she gripped the phone tighter. I want a relationship with you that isn't built on what I can give you. If that's not possible, then maybe distance is better than pretending. For a moment all she heard was the faint hum of the line. Then Jennifer's voice dropped, colder now. You don't know everything, Mom? What do you mean I've been using some of the trust money to cover debt? Evelyn blinked, her hand tightening around the phone until her knuckles ached. Debts? Credit cards? Some loans? I thought you knew. Paul said you wouldn't mind, that it was just part of what the trust was for. Evelyn's pulse roared in her ears. Without my permission. You weren't paying attention, Jennifer shot back. And it's not like you needed it. I was going to pay it back, eventually. The room felt suddenly smaller, the sunlight harsher. Evelyn turned from the window, pacing across the kitchen floor. She thought of the years she'd lived carefully, counting pennies in her own budget, while her daughter siphoned funds in the shadows. You've taken from me for years, she said, her voice steady but edged with something sharper now. Now it's my turn to take control. Evelyn lowered the phone from her ear, her reflection caught in the dark glass of the oven door, eyes clear, mouth set. This time she wasn't going to step back. I thought I was making progress, but I didn't expect the emotional toll it would take. 2 days after the phone call, Evelyn sat at her desk with a steaming mug of chamomile tea. The forms Grace had sent her lay in a neat stack, a pen resting across the top. All she had to do was sign and send them back. The language was clinical: termination of automatic distributions, revocation of secondary access, transfer of sole signature authority. But the meaning was simple. Jennifer and Paul would no longer receive a cent unless Evelyn chose to give it. Her hand hovered over the first page. It was one thing to speak the decision out loud. It was another to set it in ink. She signed. One page, then another. Each flourish of her pen felt like both a release and a cut. When she dropped the envelope into the mailbox outside the post office, the winter wind rushed against her face. She stood there a moment, watching the red flag snap upright, as if announcing to the world that something irreversible had begun. By evening her phone rang. Jennifer, Evelyn answered, bracing herself. I just got off the phone with the bank. Jennifer said, her voice sharp. What the hell is going on? You know what's going on, Evelyn replied. You're cutting us off? Just like that. After everything, Evelyn said quietly. You're abandoning me. The word landed like a stone in Evelyn's chest. I'm protecting myself. There was a sharp exhale on the other end. You've lost your mind. You can't just pull the rug out from under your own family. Evelyn closed her eyes. I've been holding that rug up for years, Jennifer. I'm tired. Jennifer muttered something under her breath, then hung up. The silence afterward was deafening. That night Evelyn lay awake, staring at the faint shadow of the curtains against her bedroom wall. Doubt seeped in through the quiet. Was she punishing Jason by doing this? Was she burning a bridge she might never rebuild? By morning, the weight of those questions still pressed on her. She kept herself busy. Laundry errands, a trip to the market, but her mind kept circling back to the sound of Jennifer's voice, angry, hurt, accusing. On the third day, she sat at her kitchen table with her laptop and pulled up her bank account. The balance blinked back at her, the numbers intact. No unexplained withdrawals. No miscellaneous transfers. For the first time in years, every cent was exactly where she'd left it. Relief came slowly, like warmth spreading into chilled fingers. She realized she wasn't just cutting Jennifer and Paul off, she was unhooking herself from a constant, invisible drain. She made tea, sat in the sunlit corner of her living room, and let herself feel it control. It was quiet, almost shy at first, but it was hers. This, she thought, will be the first of many changes. The phone rang just as she was settling into that thought. Grace's name lit up the screen. "Evelyn," Grace began, her tone brisk but calm. "I've been reviewing the trust and related accounts. There's one more thing we need to address." Evelyn straightened in her chair. "What is it?" "It's about Jason's college fund," Grace said. "Given the changes you've made, we should anticipate a dispute. Jennifer may contest your control over it." Evelyn's fingers tightened around the phone. "Contest?" "Yes," Grace said. "If she pushes, it could turn into a formal battle. I wanted you to be prepared before I take the next step." Evelyn stared out the window at the bare winter branches, her reflection faint in the glass. "Then take it," she said at last. "I'm ready for the fight. If they think they can take from me, then they'll learn just how much I've given." Grace slid another folder across the desk. This one was thicker, the paper inside a pale cream that looked deceptively harmless. "This is everything related to Jason's college fund," she said. "It's technically part of the family trust, which means it's under your authority as trustee." Evelyn let her fingers rest on the cover. "I set that up when he was 3, she murmured. "Every birthday, every Christmas I put something in there. I thought." She trailed off, because the thought had always been simple. "I thought it would be safe." "It is safe," Grace said carefully. "But right now, with the way Jennifer's been using trust resources, I can't guarantee she hasn't already counted this money as hers to manage." Evelyn's jaw tightened. "She already has. She'll say it's for Jason, but we both know it's not about him. It's about keeping control over me." Grace leaned back in her chair, studying her. "You can freeze the fund. No withdrawals, no changes, until Jason turns 18. It would give you time and protect the principal." The pen was already in Evelyn's hand before she realized it. "Let's do it." They worked through the forms together, lines to initial, clauses to confirm. With each signature, Evelyn felt the faintest sting of guilt, sharp and fleeting, followed by the heavier weight of resolve. By the time she signed the last page, the guilt lingered more than she'd like to admit. Jason had never asked for any of this. He didn't deserve to be caught in the crossfire between his mother and grandmother. But Evelyn knew this wasn't about punishing him, it was about stopping a pattern. She'd spent years letting Jennifer set the terms, holding Evelyn's love for Jason like a bargaining chip. That ended today. When Grace gathered the papers, her tone softened. "You understand, Jennifer will take this as a declaration of war." Evelyn gave a humorless smile. "She declared it years ago. I just never fought back." The office felt warmer as she left, the sun dipping low enough to cast long amber stripes across the hallway carpet. Outside the air was crisp, the kind that carried the scent of dry leaves and distant chimney smoke. She drove home in silence, her thoughts circling Jason. Would he one day understand why she'd done this? Or would he only hear Jennifer's version, the one where Evelyn was the villain who took away his future? The uncertainty twisted in her chest, but underneath it was something steadier, the knowledge that for the first time in decades, she was acting on her own terms. That night she moved through her house with deliberate calm, watering the plants, folding laundry, stacking clean dishes into neat piles. The ordinary motions grounded her, kept her from replaying the argument she knew was coming. By the time she made herself a cup of tea, her phone was buzzing on the counter. "Jennifer, again." Evelyn let it ring out. A minute later, the vibration started again, this time a text. She picked it up expecting another demand for an explanation. Instead it was just one line. "You're going to regret this, Mom." The words glowed against the dark screen, sharp and final. Evelyn set the phone down without replying, the steam from her tea curling upward in the quiet. She stood at the window, looking out into the dark street, the reflection staring back at her calm but unflinching. Whatever came next, she would not undo what she'd just done. The fallout was inevitable. but it was too late to back down. The knock came mid-morning, sharp and fast enough to rattle the front door's glass. Evelyn had just poured herself coffee. She set the mug down and opened the door to find Jennifer on the porch, coat unbuttoned, hair wind. "You didn't answer my calls," Jennifer said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. Evelyn closed the door quietly. "I didn't have anything new to say." Jennifer turned, eyes flashing. "You've lost your mind. Freezing that account? That's Jason's future you're playing with. Do you even care about him anymore, or is this just about punishing me?" "It's about stopping a cycle," Evelyn replied, her voice even. "You're selfish," Jennifer snapped. "You're tearing this family apart over money, over control." Mark's voice floated from the living room doorway. "What's going on?" He stepped into view, his gaze flicking between them. "Your mother," Jennifer said, pointing toward Evelyn as if presenting evidence, "has decided she's going to ruin Jason's life just to prove some point. She's frozen his college fund." Mark hesitated. "Is that true?" Evelyn met his eyes. "Yes. You're unbelievable," Jennifer said, turning back to her. "I have been raising a child, working full-time, juggling bills, and you sitting here in your cozy little house, decide you're going to pull the rug out from under us, because you're having a midlife crisis." Evelyn felt the heat rise in her chest, but she kept her voice steady. "I'm not having a crisis. I'm making choices that I should have made a long time ago." Jennifer let out a disbelieving laugh. "Choices that hurt your grandson? Real noble, Mom." "I'm protecting him," Evelyn said. "I'm making sure his future isn't drained before he gets to it." Jennifer's jaw tightened. "If you don't unfreeze that fund, I'll take you to court." Evelyn didn't blink. "Then I'll see you there. I'm not going to be bullied into compliance anymore." Mark shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. His silence pressed in heavier than Jennifer's accusations. "You know what?" Jennifer said, her voice dropping. "This is why Dad always said you couldn't handle money. You think you're making some big stand, but you're just proving him right." The old wound sliced clean and deep, but Evelyn didn't let it show. "Get out of my house, Jennifer." Jennifer stared at her for a long moment, as if waiting for her to flinch, to soften, to take it back. When it didn't happen, she grabbed her coat and yanked the door open. "You're going to regret this, Mom," she said, stepping onto the porch. "And so will Jason." The door shut behind her with a thud that seemed to echo through the house. Evelyn stood still in the quiet. Mark lingered in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "I don't know what to say," he murmured. "Then say nothing," Evelyn replied. She picked up her coffee from the counter, the mug still warm, and walked past him toward the kitchen table. The rest of the day passed in small deliberate tasks, sorting the mail, watering the spider plant, sweeping the front walk. Her mind kept drifting back to Jennifer's words, to the way Mark had stayed rooted to the doorway like a man avoiding the heat of a fire. She wondered how the rest of the family would see her now. The dutiful mother and grandmother, always there, always giving, had been replaced by someone they might call stubborn, cold, even cruel. But under the doubt, a harder truth had settled in. She could live with their disapproval. What she couldn't live with was going back to being managed, manipulated, erased. By evening she'd almost convinced herself she'd have a few days of quiet before the next blow came. It came sooner. She was sitting in the living room, the lamplight soft against the curtains, when headlights swept across the wall. A car door slammed outside, followed by footsteps on the porch. Through the glass, she saw the courier in a windbreaker, holding a thick envelope. "Evelyn," he asked when she opened the door. "Yes." He handed her the envelope and left without another word. She closed the door, slit the top with her thumb, and slid the papers out. At the top in bold type was the heading, "Notice of Hearing, Petition for Access to Minor Beneficiaries Education Fund." Evelyn read the date and time, then set the papers on the table. The fight she'd been bracing for was no longer a possibility. It was official. "I wasn't prepared for how personal this would become." The courtroom smelled faintly of old wood and coffee gone cold. Evelyn sat at the petitioner's table beside Grace, her hands folded neatly, a yellow legal pad in front of her though she had nothing to write. Jennifer and Paul were across the aisle, leaning toward their attorney, a man in a dark suit, whose smile was all teeth and no warmth. The clerk called the case, and the shuffle of chairs filled the air. Evelyn rose when the judge entered. A tall woman with silver hair pulled into a severe knot, her black robe falling heavy at her sides. "Miss Wright," the judge began, her tone even, "we're here today to determine whether control of the college fund for your grandson should remain with you as trustee, or be transferred to his parents. Is that correct?" "Yes, Your Honor," Evelyn said, her voice steady. Jennifer's lawyer was first to speak. "Your Honor, my clients are simply asking for what any reasonable parents would want, access to funds specifically set aside for their child's education. These funds were created with that purpose in mind, and withholding them now serves no one's best interest, least of all the child's." Evelyn could feel Jennifer's gaze pressing against her, sharp and unyielding. She kept her eyes on the judge. When Grace's turn came, her voice was measured but edged with steel. "Your Honor, my client established this fund when her grandson was 3. Over the past 15 years, she has contributed regularly, with the understanding that it would remain untouched until it was needed for tuition. However, recent evidence indicates that other portions of the family trust have been used without her consent, prompting her to secure the remaining assets." Jennifer's lawyer scoffed softly, just loud enough to carry. "Evidence, Your Honor, or assumptions?" Grace slid a folder forward. "Bank records. Withdrawals from trust accounts over the past 3 years, coinciding with large personal expenses incurred by the respondents." Jennifer shifted in her seat, her jaw tight. "We've had emergencies," she said, forgetting the rule about speaking out of turn. The judge raised a hand for silence. "You'll have your chance, Miss Clark." When it came, Jennifer did not waste it. "My mother has always been controlling. This isn't about money. It's about punishing me for not living the way she thinks I should. She's never approved of how I run my household, and now she's using Jason's future as leverage." Evelyn took a breath, letting the words pass over her without landing. When the judge nodded to her, she spoke clearly without hurry. "I'm not punishing anyone. Your Honor, I'm protecting an asset meant for my grandson. I have supported my daughter and son-in-law financially for years, covering mortgage shortfalls, car repairs, unpaid bills. I've done it quietly without asking for repayment. But when I discovered that funds from the trust were being used without my permission, I had to act. If I don't protect this account, there may be nothing left when Jason needs it." Grace slid another document toward the judge. "And if I may, Your Honor, my client would like to draw attention to Clause 19, subsection C in the original trust agreement. It states that in the event of suspected misuse of trust resources, the trustee may assume full and exclusive control of any sub-account, including those earmarked for future disbursement, until the beneficiary reaches legal age." The judge adjusted her glasses and scanned the page. Jennifer's lawyer leaned over to see his brow creasing. "Your Honor, that clause is outdated. It's still valid," Grace interjected. The judge held up a hand. "I'll determine validity after review." Silence settled, broken only by the faint scratch of the judge's pen against paper. Evelyn's pulse slowed, not with relief exactly, but with the satisfaction of knowing she'd come armed with more than sentiment. The judge closed the file. "We'll take a 15-minute recess. I need time to examine these documents before proceeding." A gavel tap, chairs scraping. Jennifer shot her a look as they stood, a mix of anger and disbelief, as if Evelyn had somehow cheated by being prepared. Grace leaned close. "You did well." Evelyn nodded but kept her eyes forward, watching the judge disappear through the side door. The outcome was still a shadow ahead, but for the first time in years, she felt she wasn't walking into someone else's plan. She was making her own. As she sat back down, the echo of the gavel still fading, Evelyn folded her hands and thought, "If I win this, nothing will ever be the same." Just when I thought I had control, something unexpected shifted the game. The hallway outside the courtroom hummed with low conversation, the scent of burnt coffee from a vending machine drifting in the air. Evelyn leaned against the cool marble wall, her hands wrapped loosely around a paper cup of water she didn't really want. Grace had stepped away to take a call, leaving her momentarily alone. A minute later, Grace reappeared, phone still at her ear, her expression sharpened to a fine edge. She mouthed, "1 second," turned her back and spoke in a low tone. Evelyn couldn't When she hung up, she moved fast, closing the distance in 3 steps. That was Martin, she said, naming the investigator they sometimes used for trust disputes. He found something you need to hear before we go back in. Evelyn's pulse quickened. Grace glanced toward the benches where Jennifer and Paul sat with their lawyer. Jennifer has a separate account off the trust where she's been moving money. Martin traced at least 3 large transfers from one of the auxiliary trust sub-accounts into it over the last 18 months. Evelyn's grip on the paper cup tightened until it crumpled. So while telling me she's barely scraping by, she's been hoarding. Yes, Grace's voice was clipped. If this is real, it could obliterate her credibility. But we don't have the certified records yet, just Martin's preliminary pulls. We need to be strategic. Evelyn's gaze slid to Jennifer across the hall. She was laughing at something Paul had said, the sound brittle and practiced. Without thinking, Evelyn crossed Jennifer, she said, her voice low enough not to carry. Jennifer's smile froze, then reformed into something polite for show. What is it now? I know about the account, Evelyn said, holding her daughter's gaze. The one you've been filling from the A flicker, just a flicker, crossed Jennifer's face before she let out a short laugh. You're imagining things, or Grace is feeding you rumors to keep this circus going. I have proof, Evelyn said. She didn't. Not yet, but she wasn't about to let Jennifer see that gap. Jennifer's jaw flexed. You've always been paranoid about money. It's why Dad, don't, Evelyn said sharply. The word cut cleaner than she expected. Jennifer leaned in slightly, her voice turning cool. You think this little stunt will win you the case? You have no idea what you're walking into. My lawyer will bury you in motions until you can't breathe. Evelyn took a slow breath. Then I'll learn to breathe differently. Paul stood now, hovering at Jennifer's shoulder, his expression unreadable. Maybe you two should. But Jennifer waved him off, grabbing her coat from the back of the bench. You're pathetic, she said, clinging to money like it's going to give you the family you've never had. Evelyn didn't answer. She turned away before the heat in her chest could push her into words she couldn't take back. Grace was waiting by the courtroom door. She deny it? Of course, Evelyn said, but she knows I know. That's enough for now, Grace replied. If she's rattled, she'll make mistakes. We just need one of them to show in front of the judge. The bailiff's voice called them back. Chairs scraped against tile as everyone filed inside. Evelyn felt the shift, the stillness of the courtroom after the hallway's charged air. Jennifer sat rigid, her eyes fixed on the bench. Her lawyer leaned toward her, whispering something that made her shoulders twitch. Evelyn kept her eyes on the judge's chair, her breathing even. The side door opened and the judge returned, her robe sweeping behind her. She settled into the high-backed seat, adjusting the stack of papers before her. I've reviewed the trust clause presented, she began, her voice level, and I've also received a supplemental document entered into the record during recess. Evelyn glanced at Grace. Grace's brows lifted just slightly, but she said nothing. The judge set her pen down, folding her hands atop the file. This document contains financial records pertaining to an account in Clark's name, records which appear to indicate undisclosed transfers originating from trust-related funds. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Jennifer's lawyer straightened sharply in his seat, already reaching for his briefcase. Evelyn's heartbeat roared in her ears as the judge looked directly at her. Given the significance of this new evidence, the direction of these proceedings may change considerably. Victory wasn't just about the ruling, it was about reclaiming my life. The courtroom was so still, Evelyn could hear the faint creak of the judge's chair as she leaned forward. Sunlight poured in through high windows, catching dust motes in the air like suspended snow. Grace sat beside her, motionless, a pen balanced across her finger. The judge spoke with deliberate clarity. Having reviewed the trust agreement, the financial records submitted, and the supplemental evidence regarding undisclosed transfers, the court finds that the petitioner, Evelyn Wright, acted within her authority as trustee in freezing the college fund. Evelyn's hands clenched in her lap. Furthermore, the judge continued, the respondent's petition for control of the fund is hereby dismissed. Custody and management of the account shall remain solely with the petitioner until the beneficiary reaches legal age. This decision is effective immediately. The gavel came down once solid. Final. Evelyn didn't move for a moment. Relief wasn't the tidal wave she expected. It was quieter, like an unknotted rope slipping free in her chest. She let out a slow breath, and only then did Grace's hand squeeze her arm. "You did it," Grace murmured. Across the aisle, Jennifer's face was pale, her mouth a thin line. Paul stared down at the table, as if the grain of the wood had suddenly become fascinating. Their lawyer was already packing up his briefcase, the set of his jaw tight. When the judge exited, the room stirred back to life. Evelyn stood, gathering her things with measured movements. She didn't look at Jennifer until she reached the aisle. Jennifer stepped into her path. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Jennifer's voice came, low and edged. "You think this fixes anything?" "It fixes me," Evelyn said, meeting her daughter's eyes without flinching. "You don't get to control me anymore." Something cracked in Jennifer's expression, barely, but enough for Evelyn to see it. Her voice softened, almost tentative. "I didn't mean for it to get this far." Evelyn searched her face for truth, but the years between them felt too wide. "Maybe you didn't," she said, "but you did enough." She stepped around her and kept walking. The corridor outside was cooler, quieter. Each step toward the exit felt like reclaiming a piece of herself she'd thought was lost. By the time she reached the street, the winter air hit her cheeks, sharp and clean. Over the next week, she began the slow work of rebuilding her days on her own terms. She called her bank to confirm the accounts were secure. She updated her will. She began saying no without padding it in apology. There were moments of ache, Jason's absence most of all, but the stillness of her small house no longer felt like loneliness. It felt like space, space that belonged to her. One morning, she made tea and sat at the kitchen table with the paper spread before her, sunlight spilling across the wood. She realized she wasn't waiting for the phone to ring, wasn't bracing for the next demand, or subtle guilt trip. The absence of fear was its own kind of peace. Late that evening, her phone buzzed. She expected Grace, maybe a friend checking in. Instead, it was Jennifer. No greeting, no preamble. "You may have won this battle, but we're family. Don't forget that." Evelyn read it twice, her thumb hovering over the screen. The words weren't a truce. They were a warning dressed in sentiment. She set the phone face down on the table, the tea beside it cooling in the lamplight. She stared at the darkened window, her reflection steady, unblinking. Whatever Jennifer meant by family, Evelyn knew this wasn't over. Not yet. Maybe the past could be fixed, but only if the thirst was embraced. The cafe Jennifer chose was halfway between their houses, neutral territory. It had floor-to-ceiling windows, and the low hum of weekday chatter. Evelyn arrived early, claiming a corner table where she could see the door. Her tea steamed gently, untouched. Jennifer entered 5 minutes late, scanning the room before spotting her. She smiled, small and practiced, and crossed the floor in measured steps. "Thanks for coming," Jennifer said, slipping into the chair opposite. Her coat slid from her shoulders in a soft rustle. Evelyn nodded. "You asked." A server appeared to take her order. Jennifer asked for coffee, black, and folded her hands on the table. "I wanted to apologize." The words were neat, almost rehearsed. Evelyn let them settle in the air. Without reply, Jennifer leaned forward. "I know things got ugly. I said things I shouldn't have. I was angry, and I let it get personal." "You did," Evelyn said evenly. "But anger doesn't explain everything." Jennifer's eyes flickered, but she pressed on. "I just want us to move forward, for Jason's sake." Evelyn sipped her tea, letting the warmth calm her before she spoke. "Moving forward isn't about pretending none of it happened. This isn't about forgiveness. It's about you understanding what you've done." Jennifer looked away, her gaze catching on the condensation on the window. "I know I crossed lines. I took advantage. That's part of it," Evelyn said quietly. "But you also decided I didn't matter unless I was useful to you. And that's harder to forget." The coffee arrived, and Jennifer busied herself with the cup, as if stirring something that wasn't there. "I didn't mean for it to feel that way. I thought, I thought you knew I appreciated everything. Evelyn studied her. The apology was there, but it was fragile, half-formed, and Evelyn wasn't sure if it came from regret or strategy. Still, there was a crack in the wall, small but real. I'm willing to start fresh, Evelyn said finally, but I'm not the same woman you've been dealing with. You don't get to decide the terms anymore. Jennifer gave a short nod, almost cautious. Okay. They lingered another 15 minutes, circling safe topics, Jason's school project, the weather, a recipe Evelyn had tried. It was civil, even pleasant in moments, but there was a carefulness to it, like walking a path where the ground might give way. When they parted outside, Jennifer hesitated before hugging her. Evelyn allowed it, but she felt the distance in it, two people pressing together, while their thoughts stayed elsewhere. The winter sun was low when Evelyn drove home, casting long blue shadows across the road. She wasn't elated, and she wasn't gutted either. It felt more like the slow closing of a door she'd once thought would never shut. Inside her quiet house, she hung up her coat, fed the cat, and set the kettle on. The meeting replayed in her mind. Jennifer's voice careful but strained, the pauses that said more than the words. She knew the relationship would never return to what it had been. But maybe that was the point. Maybe this new shape, less giving, more guarded, was the only way forward. The kettle whistled. She poured the water over her tea bag and carried the mug to the kitchen table, where the late sun lit the wood in gold. That's when she saw it. A single envelope lay beside the morning's mail, cream-colored and thick, her name written in black ink across the front. No return address. The handwriting was unfamiliar, precise, deliberate. Evelyn set down her mug and picked up the envelope, running her thumb along the edge. The paper felt expensive, the kind you didn't use for bills or casual notes. For a long moment, she just held it, the quiet of the house stretching around her. She slid a letter opener beneath the flap, the sound of tearing paper loud in the stillness, wondering who, besides Jennifer, still had something to say. For the first time, I wasn't afraid of what the future held. The letter had been short. No threats, no apologies, just a simple sentence, written in the same careful hand that had addressed the envelope. Your strength is noticed. No name, no explanation. Evelyn kept it tucked in the drawer by her bed. She didn't know why, only that it felt like a quiet affirmation, an acknowledgement from somewhere beyond the messy circle of her family. 2 weeks later, she found herself in the lobby of the Westfield Women's Shelter. The building was warm and smelled faintly of cinnamon from a tray of muffins cooling in the kitchen. She'd read about the shelter's work in the local paper, providing transitional housing, job support, legal aid. The article had stayed with her. A volunteer coordinator named May, a woman with soft gray hair and bright eyes, walked her through the building. They passed a common room, where two women sat on a couch, a toddler asleep across their lap. In a sunlit corner, another woman was filling out forms, her hand trembling just slightly over the pen. This place, May said as they paused outside the kitchen, isn't about rescuing anyone, it's about giving them the tools to rescue themselves. Something in that struck Evelyn deep. She thought of her own long years of quiet suffocation, how hard it had been to see she could step away from it. By the end of the afternoon, she'd signed up for 3 shifts a week, helping with intake paperwork, sorting donations, and when needed simply listening. Her first day on the floor, a young woman named Carla sat across from her in the small interview room. She was 20, maybe 21, her sweatshirt sleeves pulled down over her hands. Evelyn asked the intake questions gently, giving space between them. She noticed how Carla's shoulders loosened, just slightly when Evelyn didn't rush her. Later, as Evelyn stacked canned goods in the pantry, she realized she wasn't thinking about Jennifer or the court case. She was thinking about Carla, about the women she'd yet to meet, about how good it felt to be useful in a way that didn't cost her pieces of herself. Days settled into a new rhythm, mornings with tea and a walk through the park, afternoons at the shelter, evenings with a book or the slow work of trying new recipes, just because she wanted to. She didn't stop hearing from Jennifer entirely. There were sporadic texts, mostly neutral updates about Jason's grades, a photo of him at a science fair. Paul called once, awkward and brief, to say he hoped they could move on. Evelyn kept her replies polite but short, the boundaries holding firm. What surprised her was how light it felt to keep that distance. No more quick transfers to cover emergencies. No more unspoken debts. Her money was hers. Her time was hers. Her quiet was hers. One Saturday she stood in her small garden, pulling weeds from the raised beds. The air was cool, the soil dark and damp under her gloves. For the first time in years, she felt her shoulders lower without conscious effort. The absence of tension was almost its own kind of joy. In the evenings after her shifts, she sometimes walked by the cafe where she and Jennifer had met. She never went in. She didn't need to. The conversations she had now at the shelter, in the grocery store, with the neighbor who brought over cuttings from her lilac bush, were enough. They were hers by choice, not by obligation. One night she lit a candle on the kitchen table and ate dinner by its glow. No TV, no phone in reach, just the slow savoring of her own company. She thought about the letter again, the one in her bedside drawer. Whoever had sent it, they'd been right. Her strength had been noticed, and it was growing. The phone rang just as she was rinsing her plate. She almost let it go to voicemail, but something in the unfamiliar number on the screen made her wipe her hands and answer. Hello? There was a pause, then a voice she didn't recognize said, Mrs. Wright, we need to talk. It's about someone you know. The line went quiet, the words hanging there, heavy with something she couldn't yet name. I was moving forward, not just for myself, but for the future I now controlled. The voice on the phone had belonged to a program coordinator from an international volunteer network. They were looking for experienced women over 50 to join a cultural exchange in Europe. 3 months of community outreach and skills training in rural towns. Evelyn almost laughed at first. Europe? Her. The idea seemed too far from the woman she'd been for decades. But the coordinator's words lingered after the call ended, tugging at something in her. By the following week, she'd filled out the application, sent in her references, and on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, opened an email with a single line, "We'd be honored to have you join us in Italy." She stared at the words, letting them sink in. No one had asked her permission. No one had tried to guilt her into saying no. It was hers to decide, and hers alone. When she told Grace over tea, her lawyer friend grinned. You should go. You've spent enough time holding still for other people. The flight left in early spring. Evelyn packed light, 2 suitcases, her favorite journal, and a camera she hadn't used in years. As the plane lifted into the night sky, she pressed her hand against the small oval window, watching the lights of her city dissolve into darkness. In the hills of Umbria, mornings smelled of fresh bread and wood smoke. She stayed in a restored stone farmhouse with 3 other volunteers, women from Canada, South Africa, and New Zealand. They taught English in the mornings, helped at the village market in the afternoons, and shared long dinners of pasta, olives and local wine under strings of soft lights. For the first time in years, Evelyn felt herself unfolding. She walked narrow cobblestone streets alone, the air cool against her face, no destination except wherever her feet decided. She kept a small leather-bound notebook in her bag, scribbling down details. The sound of church bells at noon, the way the mountains blushed pink before dusk, the stories the locals told over coffee. One evening, her Canadian housemate leaned over the dinner table. You should publish these, she said, tapping Evelyn's notebook. People would love to read them. The idea startled her, but didn't fade. That night she sat at her laptop and began typing. The words flowed faster than she expected. By morning she'd set up a simple blog, the second act notes from a life reclaimed. Posts went up every few days, photos of the market, reflections on leaving behind what no longer served her, little sketches of moments that felt too precious to forget. To her surprise, strangers began writing back emails from women who said her story had pushed them to leave bad jobs, end toxic relationships, start again. The more she wrote, the more she realized she wasn't just documenting a trip. She was mapping the contours of a life she'd once believed was lost to her. Months passed in a rhythm of work, laughter and exploration. She took trains to Florence, to Venice, to Rome. She stood in front of paintings she'd only ever seen in books, walked ancient roads, learned to order coffee in Italian without fumbling. And somewhere in those weeks, she stopped thinking about what Jennifer might say, or whether the next call from Paul would carry some subtle demand. She was living outside their reach, not in defiance, but in peace. By the time her return ticket loomed, she knew she'd come back different. She'd built a self that no longer revolved around what she could give to others. Her last night in Italy, she sat by her bedroom window, watching the moon rise over the dark hills, and thought, this is only the beginning. Back home, she unpacked slowly, savoring the familiar scent of her house. On the kitchen counter, a stack of mail waited, bills, flyers, the usual, but in the middle was an envelope unlike the rest, thick, cream-colored, with her name written in looping blue ink. No return address. She slid it open with the same brass letter opener she'd used on the mysterious note weeks before. This time, the message was longer. Evelyn, you deserve to know the truth. Your sister has been holding a portion of the family inheritance in her name for years. It's yours by right, and I can help you claim it. There was no signature. Evelyn read the words twice, the weight of them pressing into her chest. She set the letter down slowly, knowing her journey forward had just taken an entirely new turn. They may have forgotten me, but I was finally at peace with myself. The first weeks back felt almost like a second kind of travel, moving through familiar streets that seemed somehow altered, as though her absence had stretched the space between what had been and what now was. The letter about her sister sat tucked in a drawer, not ignored but waiting. Evelyn knew she'd face it, just not yet. Instead, she let herself sink into the comfort of her home. She unpacked the last of her things, scarves from Florence, a ceramic mug from a market in Perugia, a stack of postcards she'd never gotten around to mailing. Each object seemed to hum with a story, a reminder that she had gone, she had seen, she had lived. It was over coffee one morning that the idea came to her. Not another trip, not yet, but a gathering. Something to mark the quiet but undeniable shift inside her. She called it a small dinner when she invited the few people she truly wanted there. Grace, May from the shelter, her neighbor with the lilac bush, 2 women she'd met on the Italy trip, who happened to be passing through town. On the evening of the dinner, she lit candles along the windowsills and set the table with mismatched plates, each one carrying its own history. The smell of rosemary chicken filled the air, blending with the warm notes of baked bread. She wore the deep blue dress she'd bought in Rome, the one that made her feel like the most unapologetic version of herself. When the guests arrived, the house filled with laughter that rose and fell like music. They talked about books and gardens, about travel plans, and the strange joy of learning something new in midlife. No one asked her for money. No one implied she owed them anything. The conversation flowed without the sharp undercurrent of obligation she'd known for so long. At one point, Grace caught her eye from across the table and mouthed, "Look at you." Evelyn smiled, and it wasn't just for show. After dessert, she lingered in the doorway with her guests, as they wrapped themselves in coats, the winter air spilling in from outside. Each goodbye carried the weightless warmth of choice. These were people she welcomed into her life, not people who had forced their way in. When the door finally closed and silence settled, Evelyn walked through the room slowly, trailing her fingers along the back of a chair, the edge of the table. She thought of the woman she'd been a year ago, standing in her kitchen, measuring every word, keeping herself small to keep the peace. Now she felt larger. Not in presence exactly, but in certainty. She belonged wholly to herself. She poured the last of the wine into her glass, and carried it to the living room, curling into the corner of the couch. Outside, snow had begun to fall in soft spirals under the streetlight. She watched it for a long time, the quiet wrapping around her like a second skin. Her mind wandered, not to Jennifer, not to Paul, but to the road ahead. She could take on the inheritance issue with her sister. She could travel again. She could stay right here and still feel like the world was open to her. The choice for once was hers entirely. She reached for her journal, flipping past the entries from Italy. In neat, deliberate handwriting she wrote, "I am not what they needed me to be. I am what I choose to be." A soft vibration against the coffee table pulled her from the page. Her phone, screen lit in the dim room. The name made her pause. Jennifer. She hesitated, watching it pulse once, twice before picking it up. The message was short. "Mom, can we talk? I want to try again." Evelyn set the phone down beside her wine glass, her reflection faint in the dark window. The snow kept falling, and for the first time she realized she could decide not from fear, but from freedom, whether to open that door again. "They gave me a plate. I built a feast for myself." The following weekend, Evelyn's dining room was alive again, though this time it wasn't about marking change. It was about living in it. The table gleamed under the soft light of the chandelier, set with an ease that came from years of habit but none of the strain. Crystal glasses caught the flicker of candles. A large bowl of fresh pears and grapes sat at the center, flanked by platters of roasted vegetables, fragrant rice, and a slow-cooked lamb shank she'd basted all afternoon. Her guests trickled in, a blend of shelter volunteers, neighbors and friends, made along the way, people she had chosen, not inherited. May arrived first with a loaf of sourdough still warm in its paper wrap. Then came Eleanor, her travel companion from Umbria, carrying a bottle of wine she swore was worth every ridiculous euro. The laughter began before everyone had even sat down. Grace recounted a minor courtroom disaster involving a photocopier and a very surprised judge. May teased Eleanor about her Italian pronunciation. Someone else passed around a plate of chocolate tart Evelyn had baked that morning. There was no tension here, no undercurrent of expectation. No one was testing her boundaries. Every story told was an offering, every shared glance an invitation. Evelyn found herself simply listening, really listening, without waiting for the part where she had to defend, explain or smooth something over. She watched hands reaching for bread, heard the way chairs scraped the floor as people leaned in to laugh, felt the weight of a contentment so new it was almost shy. At some point, Eleanor turned to her. "You know, you've built something rare here." Evelyn smiled. It wasn't rare, it was just buried. Dinner stretched into hours. When the last plates were pushed aside, and the candles burned low, she poured coffee and slipped into her favorite chair by the window, letting conversation swirl around her. Her gaze drifted to the snow outside, flakes slow and deliberate, turning the street into something clean and untouched. She thought of the woman she had been, the one who had measured her worth by what she could give away. She thought of Jennifer's text still sitting unanswered in her phone, of her sister's hidden inheritance, of all the versions of herself that had carried her here. She realized she didn't need to decide about any of it tonight. Peace, she understood now, wasn't a destination. It was a choice she could make again tomorrow, and the next day and the day after that. When the last guest left, she stood at the door for a long moment, looking down the quiet, snow-dusted street. The cold bit at her cheeks, but she didn't retreat until she was ready. Back inside, she moved slowly through the rooms, blowing out candles one by one. The scent of rosemary and warm bread still clung to the air. Her hands trailed along the edge of the table, the wood worn smooth by years of meals. Some bitter, some sweet. In the kitchen, she stacked plates in the sink, but didn't rush to wash them. Instead, she poured herself the last splash of wine, the liquid catching the faint golden light, and carried it to the couch. She sat with her legs curled under her journal open on her lap. The pen moved easily. "I built a life worth staying in." She underlined it once, then closed the book and leaned back, the quiet settling around her like a well-loved quilt. The fire in the hearth was down to embers, the kind that glow more than they flame. Evelyn watched them pulse and dim, thinking how much they were like her own heart now, steady, warm, unhurried. Tomorrow would come with its choices, about family, about the letter in her drawer, about where she might go next. But tonight she was not pulled forward or back. She was exactly where she wanted to be. She rose, crossed to the window, and pressed her palm against the cool glass. The snow caught in the lamplight, turning the street into a silver ribbon leading off into the dark. Evelyn smiled, not the smile of someone seeking approval, but the kind that blooms when you know you belong to yourself, and stepped away from the window, ready to meet whatever waited beyond it.